saving some gas. Let's see which of these two deserve your hard-earned money. Want to customize your Windows 10 desktop wallpaper and look as you please, and also get rid of that annoying watermark in the right bottom corner of your screen? Visit GoodOffer24 and use my promo code TACTIC for a discounted genuine Windows 10 license and activate your Windows today for good with a cheaper offer. Hello guys, Matthew here and welcome back again to my channel. After a lot of you, and I mean a lot, thank you for that, watched my comparison of the new G923 and its predecessor, the G29. Even more of you mentioned this, Thrustmaster's T300RS GT, as a better choice for this price point. So, well, let's see if Thrustmaster's T300RS GT will give you a run for its money. At this moment, we all have to have one thing in mind, and that is that these two wheels now cost pretty much the same, which is an important thing moving on with this comparison, because if it was otherwise, for example, if the G923 would to cost as same as the G29 during the past year or so, that being around 220 to 240 euros where I live, the conclusion wouldn't be the same, although the comparison on a technical level still stands, as they are both coming from a same wheel segment, so to speak, but in that case the value proposition would be different. As you all probably saw in my review of it, Logitech did a modest facelift with its new old G923 wheel, where they've changed up the color scheme a bit, kept the same outer physical design, put some kind of haptic feedback feature for more immersive gameplay, put a progressive spring into the brake pedal to make it a bit more real life, but when you draw the line it's not that different from its predecessor in its core. On the other hand, the Thrustmaster's T300 series, in particular the T300RS GT, which I have here, is also a well-known model among racing community, just as the G920 was, and now the G923. It's been on the market for some time now, so it's not exactly brand new, but it still manages to end up on shortlists of a lot of users who are thinking of getting into sim racing, so it gets pinned a lot against the Logitech's predecessor and of course now its successor too. I had a chance to try it out once, but this will be the first time that I'm going to get more up close and personal with it in order to draw some conclusions during this back-to-back testing. Comparing them in build quality, they feel pretty much the same when it comes to their respective housings for the wheel and pedal base, supporting plastic construction. When it comes to the wheels, both of them feel equally good, very robust, combining metal framing and leatherette upholstery in case of Logitech's wheel, and rubber upholstery in case of Thrustmaster's stock wheel, which makes it a tad less premium looking. But that can easily be changed, which is why I've mentioned the word stock for a reason, because Thrustmaster offers a possibility to put a different wheel to its wheelbase thanks to its detachable type of wheel hub. While the hub itself is not metal and technically it's not a quick release one, which you usually see in real cars that have a system like this, you can still change the wheel in less than a minute. As you've probably noticed, here I have another wheel with me, Thrustmaster's Ferrari Alcantara 599XX Evo 30 model, which looks really cool and it's also 300mm in diameter. Because of this, it almost feels like the real deal, especially since it's really similar to the original found in the real-life car, so it's basically a replica of it. This wheel also uses the same shifter pedal setup on the back as the stock GT wheel, but since the wheel is larger, it makes everything a bit more spacious around it. There are actually some third-party mods and rims for the wheel of the G29 and now the G923 presumably, and the same goes for the T300RS, but it still has that advantage of having an official support of installing a different wheel on it. On the other hand, the G923 like this has more switches and buttons, so you have that flexibility if you want to go crazy on those shortcuts, while both the stock and the 599XX Evo 30 wheel offer a similar amount of buttons, plus a D-pad. Where Thrustmaster also stands out is with its gated manual shifter as an add-on, the THA, which, although not that cheap compared to Logitech's shifter, feels miles better when it comes to build quality. You will definitely feel that you have something much sturdier in your hand. Since the T300RS GT comes with the clutch pedal, it makes sense to get the shifter too, although you could use the clutch pedal in combination with the pedal shifters on the wheel, but that's a bit unconventional. Lastly, although the G923 has LED indicator shifter lights, the T300RS GT has 1080 degrees of lock-to-lock wheel rotation compared to 900 degrees that G923 has. As for the wheelbase installation, Logitech uses two clamps on each side, the same mechanism which they've been using since way back on their older models, making the wheelbase very straightforward to install onto a table. But despite of that, in my experience, the wheelbase still tends to move around, and I feel like Thrustmaster did a better job with this big clamp, although it's a bit more finicky to hook it up, but they've used a lot of rubber padding all over the major surface contact points on the bottom of the wheelbase, so I didn't have any issues of wheelbase moving around. Of course, this is not an issue for either of them if you plan to use a dedicated rig and just screw the wheelbase into the stand, and both of them have dedicated holes for just that. Coming down, literally, to the pedals, here is where we again have some interesting differences. For a lot of users, Logitech's pedals have been a sore point, in particular the brake pedal, where it had that a bit of a two-tone feel, which is now improved thanks to a progressive spring instead of a linear one, and ditching the rubber stop. There is still a lot of aftermarket mods for it to improve it even further in that regard, being it with just using different springs or getting load cells for it, which makes it that much better, but as it is, out of the box, they are okay. When it comes to Thrustmaster's pedals, the T3PA GT pedal base, which come with the T300RS GT wheel, has a 3-pedal setup, so with a clutch, instead of just having a brake and a throttle pedal. The whole housing is a bit raised, carrying big and very minimalistic metal pedal covers, which are also adjustable just by unscrewing and moving them around if you need them to be closer to each other for your heel and toe technique, similar to Logitech's solution. Unfortunately, the pedal arms are not made out of metal, like Logitech's or on their T3PA Pro model, but they are rather plastic ones, but they do feel and look really sturdy. As for their placement, when you put it on a hard floor, it doesn't budge at all thanks to a lot of wide rubber padding on the bottom side. While that cannot be said for Logitech's pedals, I always have to put something between it and the back wall so it doesn't move around. Both the Logitech and Thrustmaster use not that common types of connections for hooking up devices between each other. For example, Logitech uses serial connections and Thrustmaster uses this RJ12 type of connector for the pedals. It instantly reminds me of those modems. The power cable and connection on the Thrustmaster is also completely different from what you usually see, like a laptop barrel type of connector, but I personally like this one. It's really robust, you can just yank it out, plus the power supply is integrated within the wheelbase. Also, if you plan to use the THA shifter, be sure to use the added USB cable for it, because hooking it up directly to the wheelbase only works if you're using a console. It just won't get recognized otherwise, which is a bummer because you have to use 2 USB connections for the wheel and shifter separately. Not a big deal, but still. Oh yeah, I love how they use this locking ring for it. Where these two wheels majorly part from each other is once you take a look under the hood of their wheelbase. As we now know, Logitech stayed with the same gear-driven system for the G923, using 2 smaller brushed motors on each side of the big gear, which they are driving and which is attached to the wheel and the wheel hub itself. On the other hand, the T300RS GT uses a belt-driven system, 2-belt actually, in combination with a single brushless motor and a cooling system. They are also using a contactless magnetic hole sensor for more precise positioning of the wheel. That's all well and good, but what does this mean when you're out and about driving your Assetto Corsa, iRacing, project cars and so on? The most obvious difference is in the force feedback, where the T300RS GT feels more precise and real-life-like. It is just that much smoother compared to the G923, mostly thanks to that belt-driven system. You also won't have that notchy and grimy feel of the gears with the T300RS GT, while you won't experience any center play or more excessive dead zone that the G923 has. And although the G923 has the added True Force feature, in reality it doesn't add to the driving feedback and what's actually going on with the car, so you can then act upon it. It does add a new level of immersiveness when playing, but it's a bit debatable since you don't find that kind of haptic feedback in real life. After this, the biggest difference is definitely in the loudness of the systems, where the G923 can sometimes sound like something is loose in it, whereas the T300RS GT is really quiet, especially if the cooling fan is off, but even with it on, I find it to be more subtle. Speaking of the fan, if you tend to play on longer periods or use the full strength of the motor for the force feedback, it will eventually turn on. You can also switch from the automatic to force mode in case you want to cool the motor all the time and not rely on the internal temperature reading, just to preemptively prevent any overheat and loss of power, while it's always good to lower its overall strength output so it doesn't clip, and you don't lose any force feedback or unnecessarily strain the motor. As for the pedals, out of the box Logitech has a bit firmer brake pedal, while Thrustmaster offers you a free option of installing this additional stopper, conical brake mode to be precise, which adds more resistance to it, so you have a better feel for those more brake sensitive cars. I advise you to use it right away, it will improve your experience from the get-go. Other than that, I had no complaints between their clutch and throttle pedals, while overall the T300RS GT suited me better and was actually quieter and less clunky. Both of them do not use load cells, but rather potentiometers, but as I said before, if you want and really need to go that step further, you can do so with some of the aftermarket mods. Comparing the manual shift sticks, as I already mentioned, the TH8A is a robust and almost real-life type of product, especially when you have a gated shifter like this one. It feels like you're almost driving a real-life manual Lamborghini Gallardo. The only thing that bothered me about it is its lack of resistance and long throw. That second one is not that surprising for a gated shifter, but there is a possibility of shorting its throw with getting an aftermarket shorter connection rod and swapping it out. On the other hand, Logitech's shifter has a short throw by default, although I tend to misshift its third gear occasionally. It only works with the wheelbase itself, while, as I mentioned earlier, the TH8A shifter can be used separately as another game controller via its USB dongle on the PC, plus it has a sequential shifter mode option, something which Logitech actually had before with its older shifter, and now it doesn't. Nevertheless, Logitech's H shifter is a good choice for what it's worth. It's hard to beat its value, although yeah, it sometimes feels like you're playing with a toy, but I must add that this particular one did withstand the test of time. Coming down to the last piece of the puzzle, software, they both have similar level of settings available, although Logitech's G-Hub utility has a possibility to do macro functions on the spot, whereas the Thrustmaster doesn't have a single solution for everything. They have 3 separate programs for doing updates, firmware checks and settings, plus you technically have to go through Windows Game Controller settings to get to it, which is not a big deal, but I feel like it can be done in less clicks. As I said at the beginning, having in mind that they basically have the same price, actually the G923's average price is mostly towards the €400 mark where I live, and that's also the official price on Logitech's website. There are some shops offering the PC PlayStation version of it for around €340, the PC Xbox version holds higher, while the T300RS GT's average price is more around €350. The choice is pretty obvious. After going back to back between these two wheels for a week or so, I feel like for the same amount of money the T300RS GT looks to be a more obvious choice even without the manual shifter, as most of the cars and games can be driven using just the flappy pedals. If one day the G923 again gets its price down to around 220 to 240 euros, dollars, what have you, like its predecessor, it would be a different value proposition, but at the moment, as many of you pointed out in the comments of its review, the T300RS GT feels like a better deal for this price segment, especially since the wheel and the whole system around it, the force feedback in particular, is a step up from the G923. That's it for this time from me. Thank you once again for watching. Please take a second to toss me a thumbs up if you enjoyed my content, that really helps a lot. And if you like what you saw, feel free to subscribe, and if you already are, be sure to press that notification bell down below so you don't miss out on a new video. Until then, catch you later guys. And its predecessor, the G927, the G29, the G29.